In the stark landscape of 1,840 seconds, Yorkshire, Blackthorn Hall stood as a monument to sorrow. For 4 years, since the sudden death of his wife, the Duke of Rothmere, Henry, had haunted his own estate, a man entombed by grief. This grief choked the grand home, and its most innocent victims were his 5 children. They were known in the county as a wild, unruly brood, a reputation earned by vanquishing a long line of weary governesses. The eldest, 12-year-old Edmund, had fashioned his father's grief into a shield of sharp-edged cynicism. His dark eyes held a sadness that ran deeper than his years. The 9-year-old twins, Clara and Thomas, had vanished into a world of silence. Frail, anxious Clara filled sketchbooks with haunting images of the bleak moors, while Thomas whittled away at pieces of wood, his hands as restless as his spirit. The youngest, 6-year-old twins Amelia and Arthur, had no outlet for their boundless energy, which often erupted into pure mayhem. Into this world of rebellion and pain walked Miss Eleanor Hale. At 24, she was an orphan herself, armed with little more than a keen mind and an unbreakable spirit. Her plain gray dress did not impress the stern housekeeper, Mrs. Grange, who greeted her with a gaze full of chilly doubt. The house was cold, heavy with disuse, and the portraits of ancestors stared down from behind shrouds of cobwebs. When Eleanor entered the nursery, 5 pairs of eyes fixed on her, a unified front of defiance. Edmund delivered the challenge, his voice cutting. Our last governess cried before the second day was done. She didn't last the week. Eleanor met his hostile gaze, her own voice steady and calm. I am not the last governess. I am the new one. Eleanor knew this was not a battle to be won with force. It had to be a quiet siege, fought with patience and empathy. She didn't demand respect. She began to build a new world for them within the nursery's grim walls. She found a way to reach each child on their own terms. She met Edmund's cynical intellect with debates over Roman military strategy, giving his restless mind a worthy opponent. For Clara, she provided not just fine watercolors but quiet, sincere praise for the raw talent in her sketches. She taught Thomas how to carve a whistle from a block of willow, giving his fidgeting hands purpose. And for the little twins, Amelia and Arthur, she wove fantastical stories of brave knights and dragons, capturing their imaginations and soothing their chaotic energy. Slowly, the oppressive silence of the nursery gave way to the scratch of charcoal on paper, the reedy notes of a new wooden flute, and eventually, the rarest sound of all, laughter. It was a sound that had not been heard in Blackthorn Hall for 4 desolate years. It was into this fragile, new world that the Duke of Rothmere returned. He arrived on a storm-lashed evening, a tall figure cloaked in shadow, his grief hardened into cold indifference. He first encountered Eleanor in the dusty library, his voice low and devoid of emotion as he inquired about her progress. She offered no excuses, but presented her journal, detailed lesson charts, and a portfolio of Clara's increasingly hopeful artwork. The Duke's shadowed eyes lingered on a new sketch of a hawk in flight. A flicker of surprise crossed his features before being extinguished. He offered no praise, only a clipped, "They speak of you," before dismissing her. As Eleanor left, she felt his eyes on her back, filled not with warmth, but with a deep, unsettling, and awakened curiosity. From that day on, the Duke became a silent, watchful presence. His path began to intersect more frequently with Eleanor's. Their encounters were brief and almost entirely wordless, yet they crackled with an unspoken tension. One afternoon, he found her in the gallery with Edmund, engaged in a passionate discussion about the courage of his ancestors. Their eyes met over the boy's head, and for a fleeting second, the grieving Duke was replaced by an intrigued man. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod before melting back into the shadows. Another day, as Eleanor walked with the children on the misty moors, he rode up on his black stallion. He dismounted without a word, his gaze falling on the small, carved flute Thomas was clutching. He took it gently, examining the craftsmanship. Just then, a sharp gust of wind tore at Eleanor's bonnet. Without a thought, The Duke reached out a gloved hand to steady the ribbons. The touch was brief, yet a jolt shot through Eleanor, sharp and surprising. He released her at once, swung back onto his horse, and rode off, leaving her with a racing heart, feeling they had held an entire conversation without a single sound. The Duke began to truly notice things. He would pause in the hall, listening to the forgotten sounds of laughter filtering down from the east wing. One evening, he found Eleanor in the library long after the children slept, engrossed in a dense text on agricultural reform. They talked for nearly an hour about crop rotation, and he was struck by her sharp, incisive mind. She was not merely a governess. She was a woman of substance and intellect, trapped in a world that had no formal place for her. Just as a tentative warmth began to spread through Blackthorn Hall, a new chill arrived. Lady Beatrice Rothmere, the Duke's widowed sister-in-law, swept in on a cloud of Parisian perfume. A woman of high society and iron will, she viewed the quiet changes in the house with open disapproval. To Beatrice, Eleanor wasn't a savior. She was a low-born interloper and a threat to the established order. The drawing room became her battlefield. A seminary education, Beatrice would muse, her eyes flicking with deliberate condescension to Eleanor's simple dress. Is it truly sufficient to prepare the children for their rightful place in society? Eleanor refused to be intimidated. Practical knowledge and a kind heart serve them far better at this moment, my lady, she would reply, her voice even but with an undercurrent of steel. Beatrice saw how the children looked to Eleanor with adoration. She saw the way the Duke's guarded gaze would soften when it landed on the governess. Alarmed and jealous, she launched her campaign. She spoke often of the Duke's duty to remarry, of a perfect match she had found in London, a Lady Helena, a woman of impeccable breeding. Rothmere requires a duchess. Henry, she would insist, a woman of equal standing to restore this house to its former glory, not a provincial schoolteacher. She was determined to snuff out the flame of hope Eleanor had so carefully lit. Feeling her influence slipping, Beatrice played her most vicious card. An investigator in London confirmed her suspicions. Miss Hale's references were non-existent. Her family's ruin had been so complete that no one of standing was left to vouch for her. Beatrice presented this to the Duke as a scandalous, deliberate deception. That night, Eleanor was summoned to the library. The Duke stood by the marble mantel, his face a mask of stone in the flickering firelight. Lady Beatrice has brought some troubling information to my attention, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She claims your references are a fabrication, that you are not who you say you are. The accusation hung in the air. For a moment, Eleanor's composure faltered. Her entire livelihood was on the line. But then, she straightened her shoulders. She would not beg. She met his intense, searching gaze directly. My family's ruin was absolute, Your Grace. There was no one left to provide a reference of the sort you mean. But I have never lied about my past. I came here out of necessity, but I have performed my duties with honor. He studied her for a long, silent moment. He saw no deceit in her clear eyes, only a profound honesty. He saw a woman who had faced ruin with a dignity a dozen duchesses could not match. He had been presented with a scandal, but all he saw was strength. His decision was made. He took a deliberate step closer, his voice low and firm. "Stay," he commanded. The single word held a world of meaning, an apology, a declaration, a plea. Stay. For the children. But as he said it, they both knew it was for far more than just the children. To celebrate their progress, Eleanor arranged a small recital in the disused music room. Edmund recited a complex Latin ode, his voice clear and confident. Clara, her shyness forgotten, displayed a beautiful watercolor of the hall, bathed in the hopeful light of dawn. Thomas played a haunting melody on his flute, and the little twins sang a sweet song in perfect harmony. The Duke sat in the front row, his stoic mask finally cracking as pride filled his eyes. He was seeing his children come back to life. At that exact moment, Beatrice swept into the room, shattering the tender atmosphere. "A charming little country diversion," she announced with a contemptuous smile. "But it is time to put away childish things. I have arranged for a proper governess to arrive from London next week. Miss Hale's services will no longer be required." A horrified silence fell. Then, something incredible happened. Edmund stepped forward, placing himself between Beatrice and Eleanor. "She remains," he said, his young voice ringing with the authority of a future duke. Instantly, Clara and Thomas rushed to Eleanor's side, clutching her skirts. The youngest twins ran to her and wrapped their arms tightly around her legs, glaring up at their great-aunt. They stood as one, a fiercely loyal army protecting their queen. Beatrice stood aghast, defeated by the one thing she had never considered: the children's unshakable love for Eleanor. The Duke rose slowly from his chair. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at his sister-in-law, his gaze so cold, so final, so filled with absolute dismissal, that she physically recoiled. Her power over the house, and everyone in it, was broken forever.